The snow was still falling when I woke up with my face pressed against the cold glass of my car window, and the laptop on the passenger seat was still open. The video call had connected automatically. My aunt was staring at me from the screen at my matted hair, my 2 coats, the fogged-up windows, the empty fast food bag wedged between the seats. She didn't say anything for a very long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was the quietest I had ever heard it. "Nora," she said, "where exactly are you sleeping?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She could see the steering wheel behind my head. Then she said 7 words that unraveled the last 2 years of my life. "I'm going to fix this tonight. My name is Nora Calloway. I am 31 years old, and for the last 62 days, the back seat of a 2009 Civic with a broken rear defroster has been the only address I have. Before that, I was a mid-level software engineer at Delphic Systems, a cybersecurity firm in Columbus, Ohio. I wore lanyards and had a 401k and kept a small succulent on my desk that my coworker Jamie gave me when I joined. I understood systems. I understood how they were built and exactly how they failed. I just never expected to be the failure point in my own life's architecture. The collapse was not sudden. It was a long, quiet draining, the kind you don't notice until the tank is empty and the engine is already grinding. My brother Derek had always been the family variable I couldn't account for. He was 4 years older, effortlessly charming in the way that people who have never been held responsible for anything tend to be. When our parents died in a car accident 6 years ago, Derek became the family. He was the one who handled the estate, who sat across from the attorneys, who signed the documents. I was 25 and still knew enough to grief that I handed him everything and was grateful he took it. What I didn't understand then, and what took me years to piece together, was that Derek had been studying our Aunt Margaret for a long time before our parents were even gone. Our aunt was our father's older sister, a woman who had made herself formidable through 40 years in enterprise software before anyone was calling it that. She had built 2 companies and sold one of them for a number I still can't say out loud without feeling dizzy. She was 71, fiercely sharp and mostly solitary, living in a 12-room house outside Cincinnati with her 2 dogs and more books than I had ever seen in a private home. After our parents died, she had reached out. She had called me directly, and we had begun building something careful and real, a relationship that had been neglected through years of distance and Derek's quiet interference. I didn't know about the interference then. I only knew that for the first time in my adult life, I had family that felt like solid ground. Derek saw that and understood exactly what it meant in financial terms. His wife Sandra had expensive taste and a talent for making everything feel urgent. There was always a business concept, always one critical investment away from changing everything. First, it was a craft distillery that needed startup capital, then a property in Nashville that was going to flip itself. Then an events company Sandra was launching that just needed one bridge loan to get to its first contract. My aunt, through Derek as intermediary, funded all of it. I know this now. At the time, I only knew what Derek told me, which was that our aunt was proud of his entrepreneurial spirit and had chosen to invest in his vision. I believed him because he was my brother and because the alternative was too ugly to sit with over holiday dinners. My own relationship with my aunt continued separately, through phone calls every few weeks and one visit a year at her house, where she fed me leftover pot roast and asked me pointed questions about whatever I was working on at Delphic. She was the only person in my life who wanted to understand what I actually did, rather than nod politely until I stopped explaining. I loved her in the specific way you love someone you respect more than you understand, and I was careful with it. I never asked her for money. Not once. She had offered twice, and I had declined both times. And she had seemed pleased by that, in a way she didn't explain. Then 18 months ago, Derek called me on a Tuesday evening. His voice had the texture it gets when he's managing a situation. He told me our aunt had expressed serious concern about my lifestyle. He said she had been hearing things, that I had been irresponsible with money, that I had a drinking problem, that I had made a scene at a company event and was on thin ice at work. He told me she felt she could no longer maintain the same closeness while I was in this state, and that she needed space until I addressed my issues. He said this gently, in the voice of someone relaying difficult news they wish they didn't have to deliver. I sat on my couch for a long time after that call. I did not have a drinking problem. I had never made a scene at any company event. I was on excellent terms at Delphic, recently promoted and assigned to a high-priority project. None of what he said was true, but Derek said it with such specific detail, such practiced sorrow, that for one terrible moment I wondered if I was missing something about myself. That moment passed. What replaced it was a cold, creeping suspicion that I filed away and didn't act on, because Derek was my brother, and because I still didn't want to know what it would mean if he had lied. 2 months later, Delphic eliminated my position. It wasn't a performance issue, it was a restructure, and my project was absorbed by a team in Austin. I received a standard severance package and a polite email. I started applying immediately, networked carefully, had several promising conversations. Then, in 3 separate instances over 6 weeks, offers that had felt solid simply dissolved. No explanation, in 2 cases. In the third, a hiring manager I had met twice told me privately, off the record, that someone had contacted HR with a concern about my professional conduct and emotional stability. He wouldn't say who. He seemed genuinely sorry. I started to understand. I spent 4 months burning through savings trying to find work while Derek's shadow moved ahead of me. I cut everything I could cut. I ate badly and slept poorly and told my friend Jamie, who had left Delphic for a startup the year before, that I was in a rough patch and not to worry. Jamie is not a person who accepts that kind of deflection from people she cares about, but I was good at the performance of fine. I had been practicing it my whole life, first with our parents' arguments and later with Derek's particular brand of chaos. When I could no longer afford my apartment, I moved into my car. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I had a lead. I had 3 leads. I was a software engineer with 8 years of experience and a good reputation with anyone who hadn't been poisoned by my brother's quiet campaign, and I was going to land something within the month. The month became 2 months. The leads evaporated. My phone battery was always slightly low and I was always slightly cold, and I had perfected the art of showering at the YMCA at 6 in the morning before the regulars arrived, so no one I knew would see me. I kept a manila folder in the glove compartment. It was mustard yellow and slightly bent at one corner from being opened and closed so many times. Inside it, I kept everything. Every bank statement showing the $2,300, then $1,100, then $400 I had sent Derek over 3 years when he said he needed it. Every Venmo notification I had screenshotted. The text messages where he had asked, always in the same language, always framed as a temporary bridge, always with a date attached that was never honored. I kept the folder the way some people keep evidence of an accident they can't yet explain, because somewhere inside me I knew that what I was documenting was not a series of bad loans between siblings, but something with a shape I hadn't named yet. Jamie was the one who found me. She had suspected for longer than I knew, she told me later. She had been watching the way I deflected questions about my address, the way I always met her somewhere rather than anywhere near where I was supposedly staying. She had started driving past the parking structures near the YMCA at odd hours. She found my car on a Thursday evening in February, 93 days into my situation, in the lot behind the library where I parked overnight because the security camera was broken and the attendant who worked late shifts had stopped checking that corner 6 months ago. She did not knock on my window. She sat in her own car in the row across from me and called me from her phone. I picked up. "I see you," she said. There was a long silence. My throat closed. "I'm not going anywhere," Jamie said, "and neither are you. Put your keys on the dashboard so I know you're not going to drive away, and then open your laptop." I did both things. My hands were not steady. She video called me from 12 feet away. Her face came up on my screen, and behind her I could see her own windshield, her own parking lights. She was looking at me, looking at her, looking at me, and we had one of those conversations that only happen when someone has waited too long to say the thing they've been holding. She told me she had been trying to find the right moment, and there was no right moment, so this was the moment. She told me she wasn't angry and she wasn't going to tell anyone. She asked me one question: "How long have you known it was Derek?" I hadn't said the word out loud to another person yet. I said it then. She asked me what I had. I told her about the folder. She asked if I had thought about my aunt. I told her what Derek had said about the space, the concern, the problems I supposedly had. Jamie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Nora, has your aunt actually said any of that to you directly, in her own words? She hadn't. It had all come through Derek. Jamie let the silence do its work. Then she said, I need to make one more call tonight. Don't go anywhere. She hung up and made a separate call, and then she called me back. I found a public email for your aunt's foundation, she said. I'm going to send her something. She may not respond, but I want to try. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the driver's seat with the folder on my lap and listened to the snow settle on the roof and waited. My aunt called Jamie at 2:15 in the morning. I was still awake when my phone buzzed 40 minutes later with a text from Jamie. It said, she wants to know where you are. She's coming. I did not fully understand until the next morning, when I woke up at 6:30 to a knock on my passenger window and looked up to find my aunt standing in the library parking lot in a dark wool coat and sensible shoes, her breath making small clouds in the February air. She was holding 2 cups of coffee from the gas station across the street. She looked at my car, at the fogged windows, at the coats piled on the back seat, at me, and her face did something I had never seen it do in 31 years of knowing her. It broke. Get out of the car, she said. Her voice was completely even. Both cups are black because I don't remember how you take it. I got out of the car. She handed me the coffee. She looked at me for a long moment in the gray morning light, taking an inventory I couldn't read. Then she said, I owe you an apology that I am not going to give you yet, because first I need you to tell me everything, and I need to hear it before I say anything else. We sat in her car, which was warm and smelled of dog and leather, and I talked for 2 hours. I told her about Derek's call 18 months ago. I told her about the job offers that had dissolved. I told her about the folder, and I pulled it out of my coat and handed it to her, and she read through every page with the same focused attention she had given to everything in her life that mattered, her reading glasses down on the end of her nose, not saying a word. When she finished, she held the folder in her lap and looked out the windshield at the parking lot. The drinking, she said. I have 1 glass of wine on my birthday, I said. Sometimes not even that. The scene at the work event. I've never made a scene anywhere in my life. No, she said slowly. You haven't. I knew that, and I still let him. She stopped. He told me you were embarrassed by me, by my money. That you had said things to colleagues about not wanting to be associated with the Calloway name because of what people would assume. She looked at me. He said you needed space to establish yourself on your own terms. He made it sound generous. Like he was protecting your privacy. She paused. He was very good at it. I thought about Derek at holiday dinners, always slightly too helpful, always with the right word at the right moment. He's been practicing for a long time, I said. My aunt was quiet for a moment. Then she opened her own bag and removed a slim leather portfolio, the kind she carried to meetings. She placed it on the console between us. I had been noticing things, she said carefully. Inconsistencies. Bills that seemed wrong. Accounts I had approved that I couldn't find clear documentation for. I had started keeping a record. I want you to see it. Inside the portfolio was a printed spreadsheet, meticulous and dated. My aunt had been documenting for 7 months, payments to a company called Calloway Strategic Consulting, which she had approved through Derek as a property management and estate advisory fee. Monthly disbursements of $12,000. She had requested documentation 3 times. 3 times, Derek had sent her something that looked like an invoice but didn't hold up under the kind of scrutiny she was finally giving it. She had not confronted him. She had been waiting, she said, for the right piece of the picture. She looked at my folder. I think, she said, this is the piece. She did not take me to a hotel. She took me to her house, which was the same as I remembered it, full of books and 2 very large dogs who treated my arrival as the most significant event of their recent lives. She showed me to the guest room with the quilt that smelled like cedar and the window that looked out over the dormant garden, and she told me that it was mine for as long as I needed it, and that I didn't have to say anything about that except yes. I said yes. That afternoon, she called her attorney. Her attorney's name was Patricia Howe, and she was one of those people who seems to be made of a slightly harder material than everyone else in the room. She arrived the next morning in a gray coat and set up a laptop at the kitchen table and listened to everything with the expression of someone keeping a very controlled internal fire. She asked precise questions. She reviewed my aunt's portfolio and my folder side by side. Then she asked a question that changed everything. Has Derek ever had access to your email accounts or your digital identity? I thought about it. Derek had helped me set up my professional email when I left college, years ago. He had been in the room when I created accounts. He knew my mother's maiden name. He knew the name of our childhood dog. He knew every security question answer I had ever used. Patricia typed something. Before we proceed, she said, I'd like to request a subpoena for the account creation records and login history for any email address that may have been used in your name to communicate with institutions or employers in the last 3 years. This isn't unusual in cases where we see consistent offer retractions with a third-party contact pattern. She looked at my aunt. I also want to open a formal inquiry into Callaway Strategic Consulting. If it's a shell entity, there will be a paper trail. My aunt nodded once, the way she nodded at things that had already been decided. The days that followed were strange and suspended. I worked from the kitchen table, applying for positions, getting back to contacts, feeling for the first time like I was doing it without something invisible pulling against me. I slept through the night, which I had not done in 2 months. I took long walks in the garden with the dogs and did not think about the folder, because Patricia had the folder now and it was doing its work without me. Jamie called on the 4th day. Her voice had the electric quality it gets when she's found something that confirms exactly what she suspected. She had a friend who worked in telecom services, she said, and that friend had access to business registration databases, entirely legal, entirely public. The registration for Callaway Strategic Consulting listed one entity as its sole officer, Sandra Callaway, my sister-in-law. The registered address was a mailbox at a UPS store in a strip mall in Dublin, Ohio. The company had no employees, no website, no verifiable service history, and had been incorporated 11 months ago, 6 weeks after Derek had pitched my aunt on the advisory fee. 11 months, I said. 11 months, Jamie said. I'm sending you the filing number. I brought the number to Patricia that afternoon. She placed it on the table next to her laptop without looking surprised. The audit came back the following week. Patricia walked us through it at the kitchen table with my aunt's financial records spread in a careful line. The disbursements to Callaway Strategic Consulting totaled $142,000 across 11 months. Every transfer had been initiated on a weekday between 9 and 11 in the morning. Patricia pulled up my aunt's calendar. Every initiating transaction corresponded to a day when Derek had a scheduled call with my aunt about estate management. He had been calling to discuss her finances. She had trusted him with her attention, and he had used the access she granted him to approve his own payments. My aunt looked at the numbers for a long time. He was so earnest, she finally said. It wasn't a defense. It was a woman trying to understand how she had missed something she was angry at herself for missing. He was practiced, Patricia said. That's different from earnest. Then Patricia received an email from the service that had handled the subpoena. She read it twice, then turned her laptop to show us. The records showed that an email account had been created in my name, 1 letter different from my actual address, 2.5 years ago. The account had been used exactly 6 times. 3 of those instances were emails to HR departments at companies I had applied to, citing a history of performance issues and a concern about my stability under pressure. The language was specific. It was the kind of specific that could only come from someone who knew my work history well enough to make it sound plausible. The IP addresses for all 6 logins resolved to the same home network, Derek and Sandra's address in Dublin. My aunt picked up her phone and called her accountant. I listened from the kitchen table as she told him, in the flat, precise language she reserved for things that had already moved past emotion, that she needed an immediate freeze on all discretionary authorizations that had been routed through her estate advisory account. She did not raise her voice once. Derek found out about the freeze 2 hours later. He called my aunt. She let it go to voicemail. He called again. She let it go to voicemail again. On the 3rd call, she answered, and I was sitting across the table from her and heard every word of what she said, which was, "You have 1 week to provide full documentation for every disbursement to Callaway Strategic Consulting. If you cannot, I will be referring this matter to a forensic accountant and, subsequently, to the district attorney's office. I would strongly suggest you consult your own attorney." Then she ended the call and set the phone face down on the table, and poured herself a cup of tea with steady hands. He called me that night on my cell. I had been expecting it, and I had already asked Patricia, who had already told me to record everything. His voice was different from the one he used with my aunt. He dropped the earnest, careful tone and spoke the way he had spoken to me when we were children and I had done something he felt was a betrayal. Angry and flat and absolutely certain of his own grievance. He told me I was ungrateful. He told me I had always been jealous of his relationship with our aunt, that I had always wanted to tear down what he built. He told me I had manipulated a lonely old woman and poisoned her against the only family she had left. He told me if I didn't walk this back, I would regret it. I let him finish. Then I asked him one question. Did you create an email account in my name to contact my employers? He hung up. Patricia had the recording on her desk the following morning. Sandra called me 2 days later. Her approach was different, softer in the way that only sounds soft if you haven't heard it before. She said this was a misunderstanding. She said Derek had always been trying to protect me from the pressure of my aunt's expectations, that the advisory fees were legitimate compensation for real work, that the emails to the employers had been written out of concern, not malice, and she understood how they might look, but they had never intended. I stopped her. Sandra, I said, I need to ask you something. Is Callaway Strategic Consulting a real company? There was a pause. Of course it is, she said. Derek has been working very hard to— What does it do? I said. Another pause. It provides strategic advisory services. To whom? I said. She didn't answer. I heard her breathing, careful and controlled, calculating. I have the UPS store address, I said. I have the incorporation date. I have the transfer logs. Patricia Howe has everything else. I just wanted to tell you that directly, because unlike some people in this family, I don't do things through intermediaries. I ended the call. My hands were completely steady. The day before the formal meeting, I was sitting in the garden with the larger of my aunt's dogs leaning against my leg when she came out with a small wooden box, the kind that used to hold recipe cards. She sat in the chair across from me and held it in her lap and looked at the dormant flower beds for a moment before she spoke. I want to show you something, she said, that I haven't shown anyone. She lifted the lid. Inside was a series of folded notes, some on professional paper, and some on the kind of pale blue personal stationery that women of a certain generation kept in their desks. There were also photographs, printed on the small format paper of a home printer, and clipped together with a paper clip. Me at 7, at 10, at my college graduation, at Delphic's employee appreciation event the year I got promoted, and photos she had been given by our parents, or asked for or saved from my occasional emails over the years. She had kept them all. Your father told me once, she said, and her voice was careful with it, that Derek didn't like to share. He said it as though it were a small thing, a child's trait he'd grow out of. Your father was a gentle person. He believed people grew out of things. She looked at the photographs. I have been watching Derek manage access to me for 15 years. I told myself I was imagining it, that the calls I didn't receive were calls I had missed, that the visits that didn't happen were because you were busy and young and had your own life. She looked at me. I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how wrong until Jamie's email. What did Jamie say in the email? I asked. I hadn't been able to ask before. She said, Nora Callaway is your niece and she is sleeping in her car, and the only reason you don't know is because someone has been making sure you don't. She said it exactly like that. No preamble. My aunt almost smiled. I liked her immediately. The meeting was held in the conference room at Patricia's firm, which was a clean, high-ceilinged space in a building downtown that smelled of carpet cleaner and coffee. Patricia sat at the head of the table. Her associate, a man named Charles, who handled forensic accounting, sat to her left with a laptop and a printed report. My aunt and I sat together on one side. Derek and Sandra arrived 11 minutes late, which Patricia noted without remarking on, and their attorney, a man I had not met before, sat between them and said very little for the first 40 minutes. Patricia walked through the findings without inflection. The shell company structure, the transfer logs, the absence of any documentable services rendered, the email accounts created in my name and the IP address data that placed every login at Derek and Sandra's home, the subpoenaed records from 2 of the employers who had received those emails. The text messages that Jamie had saved, in which Derek had referenced, in vague but traceable language, a coordinated effort to manage what he called my aunt's impressions of certain family situations. Sandra's attorney objected twice. Patricia responded to both objections with additional documentation. After the second response, Sandra's attorney stopped objecting. Derek sat through most of it with his jaw set and his arms crossed, looking at the table. At one point, he looked at me, and what I saw in his face was not guilt. It was the specific fury of someone who has believed, for a very long time, that they are the only real person in every room, and who has just encountered evidence that this may not have been as true as they thought. I held his gaze. I didn't say anything. I had said everything I needed to say already, and all of it was in the documents Patricia was presenting with meticulous calm. Sandra cried. I watched her do it, and I felt nothing particular, because I had seen Sandra cry before, and I understood what function it served. When Patricia finished presenting, my aunt spoke for the first time. She did not raise her voice. She spoke the way she had always spoken when the most important thing in a room needed to be said cleanly. Derek, she said, I want to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Did you tell Nora, 18 months ago, that I needed space from her because I had concerns about her character? Derek's attorney put a hand on his arm. Derek looked at it, then looked at our aunt. I was trying to protect you, he said. She was struggling, and I didn't want her asking you for things you'd feel obligated to. That is not a direct answer, my aunt said. Yes or no? Derek was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. And were any of the concerns you described to her real? He didn't answer. No, my aunt said, answering for him. They were not. You fabricated a reason to isolate her from me. You built it carefully, and you maintained it for a year and a half while she lost her job, her apartment, and her safety, because you understood that her relationship with me was a threat to an arrangement that benefited you. That is what you did. She looked at him for a long moment with the precise attention she had always given to things that were important to her. I have drafted a full account of these findings and the supporting documentation to both of your employers. I have also referred the matter to Patricia for consideration of civil action. Sandra's attorney cleared his throat. Mrs. Halloway, on behalf of... There is also a referral to the district attorney's office regarding the fraudulent email accounts, Patricia said without looking up. That will proceed independently of any civil matter. Derek's attorney began speaking quietly to him. Sandra had stopped crying. She was looking at the table with the expression of someone recalculating. My aunt reached over and covered my hand with hers for a moment, just briefly, the way you anchor something you don't want to let drift. Then she turned back to the table. Patricia, she said, please continue. The restructuring of my aunt's estate took several weeks. The Callaway Strategic Consulting account was frozen permanently, its assets subject to civil recovery proceedings. The board of her foundation, which I met for the first time on a Tuesday morning in a conference room that looked out over the river, voted unanimously to formalize a new advisory structure with an independent oversight component. Patricia drafted the language. My aunt signed it with the same silver pen she had signed every document of consequence in her professional life, and she handed it to me to read first, and I read every page. She also offered me a position on the Foundation's Technology and Security Review Committee, which I accepted not because of what it meant financially, but because I had spent 2 months understanding how people use access to systems to do harm, and I was very good at finding the things that didn't add up. She said she thought I'd be good at it. She said it in the way she said things she already knew to be true. Jamie came for dinner the Friday, after everything was settled. My aunt made pot roast and asked Jamie pointed questions about her startup that made Jamie sit up straight in a very good way. The dogs monopolized the conversation for the portion of dinner in which Jamie made the mistake of feeding them from the table. Afterward, we sat on the back porch in coats because the evening was cold but clear, and Jamie held her cup of tea and said, I keep thinking about the folder. What about it? You built the whole case, she said. Everything Patricia needed, you had already documented. You just needed someone to give you the room to use it. I thought about the folder in the glove compartment of my car, which was now parked in my aunt's driveway because she had found me a mechanic she trusted. The mustard yellow was bent at one corner, I had been opening and closing it for 2 years in the dark. I knew what it was, I said. I just didn't know who would believe me. I believed you. I know, I said. That's why it worked. Jamie looked out at the garden, where the snow had mostly melted, and something early and green was starting at the edge of the beds. What are you going to do now? I thought about the guest room with the cedar quilt. I thought about the position on the committee. I thought about the fact that I had applied to 2 jobs in the last week, and neither application had dissolved before it reached the hiring manager. I thought about the wooden box of photographs my aunt had shown me, my face in a series of ordinary moments she had collected for decades without telling me, because she had understood something about the future she could not yet name. I'm going to stay a while, I said. My aunt appeared at the back door with a second pot of tea and the expression of someone who had been listening for exactly the right moment to come back in. Good, she said. You can start on Monday. She set the pot on the table and went back inside, and the dogs followed her, and the garden was very quiet, and somewhere in my chest, the thing that had been held rigid and cold for 2 years shifted, just slightly, in the direction of the light. Thank you so much for listening. Please drop a comment below and let me know where you're tuning in from. I read every single one. If this story meant something to you, please hit like and subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it today.